From farm to factory and back again, empowering you to make healthy decisions second nature. Segment 2, what happened to our food? Have you ever looked at an old rerun of The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson from, say, the 60s or the 70s? Or game shows that featured, people in funny outfits and so forth from the 60s? What did you notice about those folks? The thing that is most prevalent to me is that they are all a lot lighter and a lot thinner than the studio audiences of today. If you look at a game show today and look at the studio audiences and talk shows or late night television, you'll notice quite a difference in the size of the people watching the show. Well, that's because since 1960, the average American has gained nearly 30 pounds. Why? Is it that the people that lived back in the 60s that were watching these TV shows and so forth, is it that they had that much more self-discipline than the people of today? Did they get that much more exercise than we do today? I don't think so. Not with the 24-hour fitness and health clubs on every corner. Is it the food? Maybe the food is that much more better today that we just can't say no? Well, there might be some truth to that. Let's look at some of the statistics from the 1960s as it relates to food. First of all, in the 1960s, 13.5% of Americans met the definition of obesity. That is, that their body mass index, or their BMI, was in excess of 30%. Also, in the 1960s, approximately 20% of the household budget was spent on food, and 5% was budgeted for health care. And 2 out of 3 households had stay-at-home moms that shopped and cleaned and did the dishes and made dinner for all of us and raised the kids. Let's look at today instead. From today and around 2015, our obesity rate is over 30%. Up until just a few years ago, we were number 1. We were the most obese nation on earth. Mexico was number 2, but Mexico took us over. Yeah, they're number 1 now. Not that we weren't trying, mind you, but I guess Mexico just tried a bit harder. So we have 3 times roughly the amount of obesity that we did 50 years ago. Another interesting fact is that our budget for food and our budget for health care has flipped. We used to spend 20% of our household budget on food. Now we spend less than 5%. We used to spend less than 5% for health care. Now we spend 20%. And more than 2 out of 3 households have both parents working. Both mom and dad go off to work each day. What a difference. I don't know that the life was that much better or worse back in the early 60s and 70s, but I can tell you that we were a lot healthier in terms of food. Now, we all smoked like crazy. That was something else. The cigarette ads of the day were incredible. Back in the 50s and 60s and 70s, cigarettes were advertised everywhere. They were at all baseball parks. There was all the commercials on TV, all the ads that you saw in newspapers. And some of these ads even had doctors recommending their particular brand of cigarettes. Can you imagine? So in the 60s and 70s, there was a preponderance of bad habits, and we hadn't caught up yet to all of our other bad habits as it relates to food. Well, what happened to our food? What's going on with all this? I recently finished reading a book called The Dorito Effect, The Surprising New Truth About Food and Flavor by Mark Schatzker. Great book, very, very revealing. And he tells the story of really what happened to our food. So from the 1950s and 60s to today, farms got a lot healthier financially. They found chemical fertilizers that could rapidly grow food 300-400% more per acre than what had been done. Our farms went largely to these large industrial farms focused on growing large amounts of flavorless wheat, soy, and corn. All good substrates for some type of manufactured food. If you look at the major farms of today, and I have a good friend in Iowa, I go out and see him about every year, and I love to drive out there. It takes me through the beautiful mountains of both California and Colorado and into the plains. When you hit Nebraska and Iowa, you see mile after mile after mile of these large industrial farms that are growing unhealthy soy, corn, and wheat. It includes Roundup. It has chemical fertilizers to get it going. Now, the farmers liked it, sure. I mean, they got 200 and 300 and 400% more crop from the same amount of grain. Well, what happened? Here all this stuff is bigger and it's more prevalent and they can put more substrate. It's actually more substrate for the flavors they wanted to add to it. But the nutrition was left behind. And the food was nowhere near as tasty. It was flavorless today by comparison. I mean, they even got into the fact of chicken and what you can do with breeding chickens. Let me read you a little bit from the Dorito Effect. In March 1948, the chicken's descent into blandness began precisely on that date. There was a contest called the Chicken of Tomorrow. It was conceived by Howard Doc Pierce, who was the National Poultry Research Director with A&P Food Stores, one of the largest grocery stores chains of its time. And their concern was this. During the war, Americans had red meat rationing. You weren't allowed to have that much. And he wanted to make sure that when the GIs returned, they were not going to go back to the old habit of eating red meat. He wanted them to eat chicken. But what America needed was a chicken with a great big giant breast, something that the farmer could look at, a chicken that would look great and compete with the desirability of some of the big steaks and stuff that our returning GIs would love to eat. So he had a contest. And the contest was what type of breeding and food can we use to get a chicken that looks different than the chickens had previously looked. He wanted chickens with big breasts. He wanted chickens that would look flavorful, that would look delicious, but in fact, they had nowhere near the taste of the other chickens. So this problem went on and on and on. In our soy, in our wheat, in our corn, in our beef, in our poultry, everywhere you turned, the farmers were falsifying or changing the nature of food. Mark Schatzker wrote in The Dorito Effect the story of Doritos and how this gentleman, Alex West, was traveling to California with his family from Texas, stopped at a taco stand and had these taco chips or tortilla chips. He thought, you know what, this would make a good food. He was an executive with Frito-Lay at the time. And they had Fritos corn chips and they had Lay's potato chips, but the Dorito chip didn't exist. Well, through much changing and redirecting, redesigning of the food, wound up developing the Dorito chip as we know it today. It had no nutrition, but it was full of scientifically engineered flavor additives that made it taste like a taco. Ever since then, they have been going to town, they being the food companies. They generate food across America that is far higher crop yield, far less nutritious, and makes a wonderful substrate for whatever flavorings you'd like to add to it. Matter of fact, the food of today even includes Roundup as a method of making sure that invasive weeds and so forth wouldn't enter into the crops they're growing. There's chemical fertilizers. There's herbicides and pesticides in our food. All of this stuff is designed to create essentially material so that the food factories and the chemists can make food that tastes irresistible to us, whether it be in our Cokes or our Pepsis, whether it be in our chips or our crackers, or whether it be in the actual meat that we eat or the bread that we eat that is full of flavor additives, it is full of preservatives, and it's full of stuff that does not do the body any good. This is the Western diet on display. So when you look at the situation today in America, you've got 63% of the food that we eat is processed food made in a factory somewhere. It is this stuff as a substrate for whatever flavor they want it to be, or it's been grown in a way that the food itself would be flavorless, and if they didn't add the additives and the flavor enhancers, we wouldn't like it. But guess what? These flavor enhancers and the additives that they put into our chicken, into our beef, into our vegetables, into our fruit, into the things that we put in our toaster, pop-ups and all that crap, they all affect our dopamine sensors in our brain. The same sensors that get us addicted to cocaine and heroin and alcohol, the same flavoring additives that they're using are addictive in nature. There was a TV commercial for a potato chip back in the 60s and 70s that I remember. It says, I bet you can't eat just one. Well, they're right. You can't eat just one. You eat one, you got to eat two, you got to eat five, you got to eat 25. This stuff has no brakes on it because if you are at all sensitive to dopamine sensors, you're going to love this stuff. You're going to get addicted to it. You're going to want more and more of it. So today, we've got 30+% obesity. Our kids are getting type 2 diabetes. It used to be called adult onset diabetes. There's 70 some odd million baby boomers that have been raised on this stuff. Tricks are for kids. Sugar Pops are tops. Frosted Flakes. Tony says they're great. All that stuff is what we're bringing into the healthcare system of today. The flip of our healthcare costs going up to 20% and our food costs going below 5% when it used to be the opposite is a pretty good indicator of what has happened to our food supply. So the key elements here are artificial, chemical, enhanced food production methodology has increased the yield tremendously, leaving the nutrition and the flavor behind. That is what we have to learn. We cannot eat that stuff and expect different results. Einstein said, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is insanity. So if we continue to eat Western food that's been grown in this way and preserved in this way and flavored in this way, no change is going to occur. Well, let's find out how all this stuff has affected each and every one of us in segment 3. How has it affected everyone?